Hey singers, and welcome back for lesson 4 in this series on vocal resonance. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the idea of acoustical registration. It's kind of a strange concept, but you've probably noticed this in your own singing. You're singing one particular pitch, and you notice that depending on the value that you're singing, it may seem as though you're in a completely different register on the same pitch with roughly the same dynamic level, the same effort level. Your E probably sounds a little bit more like it's in head voice, your Ah sounds like it's still comfortably in chest voice, and then your O sounds belty. Well, you're not imagining this. What you're experiencing is an acoustical phenomenon. It's what might be called acoustical registration. Burton Coffin has done a lot of research, or did a lot of research on this topic, and he wrote a lot about this idea of acoustical registration, because oftentimes when we're talking about registers, vocal registers, we're really thinking and talking and writing about the purely physiological aspects of vocal registration, and we tend to ignore the acoustical aspects of registration. And I always say that vocal registration is both a physiological and an acoustical phenomenon. I think that we can't ignore one or the other, and especially the acoustical. If we ignore the acoustical, then we're denying ourselves the opportunity to even out our scales and give ourselves a much easier, a much more skillful handle on vocal registration. In the example that I gave earlier with the E, Ah, and O vowels on the same pitch and how they seem to be in different registers, what we're really talking about here are acoustical phenomena. In particular, we're talking about the relationship between the harmonics of the sung pitch and the formants of the vowel, the resonance frequencies of the vocal tract, depending on how we're shaping the vocal tract for that given vowel sound. And the relationship between the first formant in particular and the second harmonic of the sung pitch is really probably what's most critical and what we're really mostly experiencing when we feel as though our vowels are in completely different registers on the same pitch. So with the E vowel, for example, it may sound and feel as though it's in head voice, because what has already happened is here is the first formant of the vowel, which is very low on an E, it's the lowest first formant, and as we sing higher in pitch, that second harmonic passes that first formant. And that just creates a different relationship between them, a different acoustical register, so to speak. And so that's why on that same pitch, the E may already sound like it's in head voice and it may feel that way. However, with the Ah, it has a higher first formant. And so on that same pitch, that second harmonic is still below the first formant of that vowel. So we're still comfortably in chest voice at that point. But with the O vowel, it could be that its formant, which is a little bit more in the middle, is now coupling with that second harmonic, giving it that acoustical boost that we recognize as belt, that yell resonance coupling. So again, you're not imagining this. This is all an acoustical phenomenon. Now, what do we do about that when we don't want our O to sound like it's belty? Or when we don't want our E to sound like it's in head voice? Well, there are a lot of great things that we can do, and this is where the idea of vowel modification, active vowel modification, comes in. And I'm going to spend the next 2, possibly 3 videos going through more of the practical aspects of vowel modification and talking about how there are multiple ways in which we can effectively modify our vowels depending on our stylistic and artistic needs and technical goals. But for today, I just want to get you thinking about this idea of reshaping our vocal tracts to change that relationship between the second harmonic and the first formant of the vowel that we're singing. So if we don't want our E to sound quite as much like it's in head voice, well, what we can do is we can start to lower the jaw, and that's going to raise the first formant a little bit. Or we can shade the vowel a little bit more toward an I, make it less phonetically tense and go from a long vowel to a short vowel. And in the context of lyrics, the listener won't even be aware of it. The listener won't even notice that we've slightly adjusted that vowel, but it makes it easier to sing. And by shading it toward an I instead of an E, we're raising the first formant. Now, again, there are so many different ways in which we can choose to adjust that vowel, to modify that vowel, to make it easier to sing, to make it resonate more effectively, and so forth. So we can fiddle around with our instruments. We can experiment with different types of shapings, different versions of the vowel to find one that produces the sound that we're ultimately aiming for. So let's say we don't want our O to sound like it's belty. Well, we can shade it toward an ah a little bit, not all the way to an ah so that it completely distorts and the listener can't recognize what we're actually singing, the words that we're singing. We don't want to go that far. But if we slightly shade the O toward an ah by maybe lowering the jaw a little bit, maybe allowing the tongue to move a little bit more to the ah position, we compromise. We compromise diction potentially if we go too far with it, but really what we're doing is acoustically, we're just kind of adjusting, we're EQing ever so slightly, just the different balances and levels in the acoustic spectrum. That's all we're doing with vowel modification. So with the O vowel, if we don't want it to sound like a belt, well, we need to handle the fact that that second harmonic isn't going anywhere on that pitch. It's fixed, that's what it's gonna be. So we need to adjust this formant. So if we shade it toward an ah, we're raising that formant just a little bit. So now the O is back in chest voice, sounding less belty, or a chest mix, right? Or we could go toward sort of a mixed vowel, like an E vowel, where we've got the tongue saying A, but the mouth is still saying an O. That's a really common vowel, actually, for singers to intuitively modify to. I see that often with singers. They go to sort of like the Goethe vowel, I call it. It's like this sort of sound, which sounds really odd for us to speak it. But again, in the context of singing, and when the listener has the context of lyrics to help them understand what we're saying, it's really barely even detectable, the modifications that we're making. And with our ah, if we want it to sound a little bit headier, that takes a little bit more of an adjustment. But there are lots of different things that we can do with our vowels without completely compromising diction in order for us to equalize our scale and in order for us to get our vowels to sound a little bit more like we want them to sound in terms of the acoustical aspects of registration. So I hope you'll stay tuned for the next 2-3 videos on the topic of vowel modification, in which I'm going to get into the more specifics and the practical aspects of different types of vowel modification. I'm going to talk about the pros and cons of those approaches. There are, again, lots of different ways in which we can adjust our vowels to make them easier to sing, to make them resonate more effectively, to make our voices sound more beautiful. Some are going to be more effective than others in certain styles and genres, but it doesn't necessarily make them right or wrong. So it's really a matter of choice. This is the important thing for us to remember, is that we are artists. We have choices. And if we just equip ourselves with a little tiny bit of information about acoustical science, about that relationship between the first formant of the vowel and the second harmonic, that's going to take us so far in our singing, because we're going to have a much easier time crossing between the registers, and we're going to have more choices on our artist's palette when it comes to how we want a given pitch to sound, or how we want a given vowel to sound on a given pitch. All right, stay tuned. Feel free to leave your comments and questions in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to get to them when I have a moment to. If you have not already done so, please consider liking this video and also subscribing to this channel so that you will be notified when I post that next video. Take care and happy singing!